All right. Okay. Grabbing a piece of the string from the last time we were taping, an example, wasn't much of an example, come to think about it. I mentioned it though. You recall I said that if you took 50% of the people on this planet and you convinced them, we had the ability right then just to make this statement, and 50% of the people went, that is, you told them, there's no doubt, life is simply an extreme, it's either a curse, it's somewhere between a curse and an untoward burden, and death is probably to your benefit. And 50% of the people went, got it, hey, all right. And then the other 50% we said, listen, life is an absolute joy. Life is the place where everyone should be out playing. It is the one time to reach fulfillment, whoever you are. And the 50% says, all right. And they just immediately were sold on it like that. I then pointed out, or I suggested to you, that their behavior between the two groups, their behavior would not be that much different. That was the string I was picking up from last time, and that leads into this. Would you not think, if we're going to talk about thinking being something in addition to chemical reactions, but would you not think that extreme information would produce extreme behavior? Is not all parts of your chemical operations in the brain attuned to find that acceptable, even coming from this kind of source, that it seems reasonable? If you had startling information, now the example I use, I picked back up of the 50%, you don't find it all that startling because there are, of course, local voices, local pieces of diverse reality throughout history and all over this planet that has little pieces of that story. All kinds of little religions, all kinds of people who are not necessarily religious are wired up to find life to be just a big old blister on their ass. And then there seems to be people that say, hey, life, you only go around once. I guess their parents were in some way unduly postnatally affected, or they were, by that Bud or Slits campaign from some years back. But there are people that seem to just automatically be that way. But what I wanted you to understand when I said, when I went back over that example, it would be, from one view, it should be, you should see that that would be startling, extreme information if we took half the planet and they just immediately were convinced that the information itself was just taken as being, pardon the expression, the Word of God, that they were just struck that that is it, that's as much the truth as that is my hand, that life in every shape and form is a burden, and any right-thinking person will damn well be glad to be shed of it. Death will be something to look forward to. That would be extreme information if the 50% that I'm speaking of, or any percent, but I had a reason for doing it this way, that 50% of the people just immediately accept that that is as much an absolute unconditional statement of reality as that is a cup. It would be extreme. That is no doubt, no conditions, no discussion, no story about life is that way if you are such and such way, or that life is that way if you are not a follower of some religion. That just given it as an absolute unconditional statement of fact, would you not take that to be extreme information? Do you follow the point? But then I suggested to you, and enough of you have now guffawed slightly again, that I assume that you do understand that it would not create extreme behavior. Those two groups, I divide them into two to give you the example, the possibility of you considering two pieces of information that is antipodal, just diametrically opposed, and it seems to be a matter of extreme importance. The nature of life, and you told half the planet that life is just nothing. Life is just a burden, and you'll be better off to get shed of it. And the other half, you say, no, life is it. Life is a joy. Life is the time to live it up, click your heels, do all you wanted to do. It is the time to reach absolute personal fulfillment. how much more extreme can those two pieces of information be? And if those two groups, they had no choice, in some way we weave this kind of electrochemical magic on them, and each of those two groups took that. It just hit them like an arrow right in their little brains, that was just a fact. Then I suggested to you that their behavior would not vary that much one from the other. Now you're kind of giggling and smiling that several times I've mentioned it now. It should be based upon the fact that, yeah, that's true. And if I be no purpose if I ask why, you couldn't answer why. It's just, well, it sounds right. It just feels right that things would not be that much different. Now the question, that is the point I'm trying to point you towards, is what is up? That if there was extreme information, if that example was not extreme enough, the extremity, a subtle part of me using the example, was picking out two pieces of information. But what if we took other kinds of information? Maybe you people want it more cartoonishly. How about all these stories been floating around for the last 30 years in this part of the planet's pocket that the government actually has in their possession? They have captured or picked up crashed UFOs, and that they simply won't let the public know because, and then after that it's fairly standard, because it would cause widespread panic. That our great leaders, they got together at least, and their collective wisdom said, wait a minute, the man in the street's not ready for this. That this kind of information would just, it might rent the very fabric of society. All right. More of you are laughing now. You've probably heard those kind of stories. Now I ask you, would it? Would it? Is that extreme enough? Or how about another one? What if somebody now has suddenly, out there watching through the telescope, spots a meteorite 40 or 50 miles in diameter, and it's hurtling right toward the planet. There's no doubt it's going to hit. Now, is that extreme enough? Would that cause extreme behavior? Now, if it came out on the news, the first thing that the news commentators, not their fault, it's the first thing life would do through the general wiring system of humans, people would be proclaiming, wait a minute, listen, it's a news bulletin, and what we have to tell you, the president has just released this. Now everybody sit down that's listening. Now I wouldn't be at all surprised if these news commentators wouldn't loosen their tie and be sweating bullets and behave like that and say, now you people out there, I want you to get a grip on yourself. Take a deep breath, maybe sit down, because what I got to tell you, please, just listen. The president has announced that there's no doubt there is a meteorite, it's headed toward the planet Earth, and it's going to create widespread destruction. There's even the possibility this could be the beginning of the end of human life, etc. But what we're really afraid of, while we're trying to plan what evasive action or some defense we might take, is that this is going to cause such panic that the human race may destroy themselves. And as soon as you hear it, you might go, yeah, we are. Oh my God, people will be running in the streets and dying. We'll all be committing suicide in a few minutes. Whatever a few minutes may be to you, to your wiring system. An hour, a day, a fifth or two of Jack Daniels. Would it really cause extreme behavior? Now some of your wiring systems may be still telling you, yeah, it will. But let me ask you this, and if you don't see the point. You know you're going to die. Does that cause you to have extreme behavior? How extreme, what kind of extreme information do you want? You just think, the way life is wired up, that if you suddenly heard that, wait a minute, life has been a waste of time. I'm going to die and this whole thing was wasted. Or else you hear that this was your one chance. What the hell, you waiting until I was 50 to tell me that? You mean I'm not going to get another chance? Or there's a meteorite coming that's going to destroy most of us, maybe. That sounds extreme. But you've had the extreme information humanity has as long as they've been talking. As long as they have had the nervous system operating at what is known as the cortical level, so that one person could remember and then of course tell another one, because you can't remember anything unless you got at least two people. So Adam and Eve had whoever the first kid was. I can't remember his name now, Bunky, what it was. That it took the two people, and one of them had to die. And so Adam either turned to Eve if Bunky died, or you can figure out the combinations, or Bunky turned to Adam when his mother died. Somebody had to go. Do you realize your mother has not gotten up from that position now in about 2 years? All right. Ever since then, now you have had the extreme information. It does not get any more extreme than that. Does it cause extreme behavior? Next question. But have I reinforced that enough? Would it not? It's just never been presented to the human brain in this way. In fact, I don't know if it's ever been presented in any way even slightly similar, but when I pointed out that extreme behavior should cause, extreme information should cause extreme behavior. Everything in your wiring system, if you're just middle of the road, ordinary person would tell you that yes. Never thought about it, but yes. Startling information should produce startling behavior. If you found out, if they announced without any doubt that a meteorite is going to hit this planet 2 weeks from now, and it's going to hit in the western hemisphere, and it will hit between 1:15 p.m. and 1:45 at the latest. Is that not startling enough? But would that produce startling behavior? So after you have once initially responded that extreme startling information should produce extreme startling behavior, and then I say, no, it wouldn't, and if you think about it, unless your own wiring system is trying to out-argue me, you realize, no, it wouldn't. At least when I take it to the example, even if you tried to stop along the wayside and want to argue, I point out that death, the knowledge of death, is the extreme information to a thinking creature. And that doesn't produce extreme behavior. Everything else between there and between death and anything else from here to there, like a meteorite, that's semi-extreme. But at any rate, the epitome of extreme behavior, of extreme information, does not cause extreme behavior. So then I was going to ask you to try and ponder right quick this. Is it that the information of all kinds, examples I made up and any more, is it that the information is not extreme enough? Or is it the human intellect's lack of capacity to receive information any more extreme? Let me give it to you proverbially. I'll steal it from Kyroots, this kind of thing he would have come up with. Proverb. The bucket knows the amount of water in the universe. It's obvious what you said. The amount of water in the entire universe is the amount of water the bucket can hold. That's it. Now, you might care to, those of you with a tropical, metaphorical, paradigmatic turn of mind, might substitute info for water and intellect for a bucket. That which would seem to be the receiver of any noun, verb, process, thing, is that is its own arbitrator of the amount of that thing, information, process that is extant, not simply available. Now back to the question, for those of you who have not lost your place. After I ask, would it not seem just absolutely certain that extreme information would produce extreme behavior? And then I suggest to you that it does not. And then some of you went, yeah, that's true. And then I said, well, is it that the information, any information thus far, I didn't stop long enough, but I can say, I'll stop another second, any information you can think of. Okay, we'll make the challenge. Think of something, information more extreme than the examples I gave. Here we go. None of you fell into the good old local down-home trap, did you? Such as, well, I thought of something worse. I thought about that they are going to repossess my Mazda. Or that there is no chance whatsoever I'll ever get to sleep with a movie star. Nah. How can you think of anything more extreme, now that you think about it, than dying? And that has not produced extreme behavior. May I proceed and assume that you see that you cannot think of any more extreme behavior, but you might find of interest that until I pointed out or until you saw it immediately yourself, you would have thought otherwise. Think of the most horrendous piece of information that you could, that's possible, that somebody, the great words from Mount Olympus came down the heavens. What's the worst thing that could be said to you? Lose your car. Lose your private parts. You can think of all that, but you've got to see the most extreme piece of information is already implanted in you. That is, that you're going to buy the farm, bite the dust, chew the ultimate bullet. And it does not produce extreme behavior. So now I ask you again, is it that there is no information extreme enough to produce extreme behavior? Or is it that man's intellect is incapable of receiving that which would be, in fact, extreme information, which is easy to define according to the game I have set up for you tonight? The extreme behavior or the extreme information would be that would produce extreme behavior. Is it that man is not capable? But notice, not just destruction, not just death and impending head-on collisions with a meteorite, but the history of man is replete with other kinds, some of it apparently of a positive or a more positive nature, of what purports to be, and what at first blush to some limited local intelligence may seem to be, extreme information. That is, all kinds of revealed religious, metaphysical information, theories. Does it not seem to be an attempt to present extreme information? And people who read it, and I'm sure many of you have in the past pursued such books, dreamed of such ideas, but is that not an attempt to present extreme information? That, hey, every now and then people show up, forget Aretha, forget that they have killed Zeus, the gods still send out their kids and their relatives, and every now and then they show up on earth. Is that extreme information or not? That this guy or this woman is not simply some other human walking around. Oh yeah, I know how he looks. That person is just, that's extreme enough for most people to say that person is actually either the gods, one of the gods themselves, or it's one of the gods' kinfolks. It's his son or his daughter. Would you not take that to be extreme information, or at least the part of your nervous system that would be your forefathers, your grandmother and your grandfather and you? Would that not seem to be on the surface extreme information? I mean, it's one thing to actually be able to meet Horowitz or get Merle Haggart's autograph in person. But if somebody to say, that guy over there, he's not a human, he's a god. I mean, he's part of the thing that created all this. Would you not find that to be extreme information? Of course, I'm just setting you up. Of course, I'm not setting you up. History is just setting you up. Of course, history is not setting you up. Life set you up. Would you not find that to be extreme information? Does it produce extreme behavior? Well, if killing a bunch of those guys is extreme behavior, okay. Not that they always did, but me bringing up the example of killing a lot of them, the point is, did it produce some kind of extreme behavior? Not simply, that, according to history, if we're going to take it, the stories, I don't mind taking them, that maybe with a few people, but did it cause some kind of mass extreme behavior such as, I was suggesting, would not happen after a few hours or a few drinks to find out that a meteorite is supposed to hit us in 2 weeks. It's been announced in the Western world 6,000 years that guy over there is not human. He's part of the process, the creative process that produced us. History does not necessarily go out with a man in the street, but let's assume that many people went, wow! You know, like the first time they saw an unassisted triple play or a 747. You remember how that affected Buddha? And they go, wow! Really? And they say, yeah. Ah, you're kidding. And maybe you say, well, all right. Yes, and 2 or 3 other people standing around go, yep, that's a fact. You go, wow! Like you're hearing a meteorite's going to hit it and kill us all. Good God, are you serious? Yeah, there's no, come on, yeah, it's serious. Woo! A few days later, you ask the guy, is there any change? Or you ask around, is there any change about the meteorite? Well, not last I heard. Ah, shit. Yeah. But a few days later, you say, what happened to that guy that you said that was, part of the guide system? What happened? Oh, he's still around. Really? Yeah, he was, I think he went off on a trip, I think, to Arkansas or somewhere, but he may come back. Oh, okay. Does it produce extreme behavior? If you can try and get some grasp, I was trying to use what would seem to be a negative, which hits most people first, that is the destruction of the planet, or that some kind of nefarious forces may be coming here from other parts of the universe or from some other place, all the way to that which would seem to hold out the promise of some positive promise. That is, that we've got now some of the big shots. We got some of the universal CEOs or some of the minions they're seeing down here. Would you not take that at the surface verbally to be extreme information that would want you, or you would have thought your forefathers and foremothers would have rushed and went, hey, now we got you here, I got a whole bunch of questions, or if your forefathers are good, you'd say, all right, I got the question. Extreme information, if it exists, and up till I pointed out, you and everyone else would have agreed that extreme information has existed. But it has never produced extreme behavior. Now back one more time before I go on to that great question of the night. Does that mean that there has never been, is not now, information extreme enough to produce extreme behavior? Or is it that the human intellect cannot receive information any more extreme than it already has? Which might it be? For those of you keeping at least 4D score, I would point out that you should know by now, in the 3D world, the answer is yes. Unless you resist it all, then the answer is obviously no. Or, unless you say, well, on the one hand, yes and no, then the answer is correct. Well, can you see that whenever humanity, from philosophers to your own private everyday dialogue, whenever it speaks in any way of the limits of knowledge, what it is actually speaking about is referring to the finite genetic capacity of its own bucket, of its own intellect. But notice, life is not wired up, man. It would be self-defeating for the kinds of general purposes we're serving now if it was otherwise. But notice, people all the way from everyday, what you would consider just everyday, ordinary people, to the apparently educated, sophisticated, even specialists in intellectual fields, they will speak of the limits of human knowledge. They'll speak about it into what would seem to be the avant-garde of scientific objective studies, particle physics, astrophysics, all the way into the softer sciences, to say the least. At least I had the decency not to call them the flaccid sciences. Psychology, sociology. They speak of the limits, and everyone is wired up that pays any attention at all, that gives any note to it, that also flows right along as being even a supportive verbal. We're taking the supportive verbal evidence of the intelligence of the speaker to say, well, let us say it's whoever the latest Nobel Prize winner is in particle physics, a leading expert, and he gives you all the up-to-date ideas they have on trying to find the ultimate grandfather law of everything to bring together all the forces, etc. And the person will say, all right, we have made some theoretical, if not practical, advances since 1983, but the perimeters are still there because, for various reasons, which I may or may not go into, we are still pushing at the limits of human knowledge. And some of it is technological, some of it is getting into the fact of it's been known in quantum mechanics for a while, that the observations themselves down at a certain basic level are beginning to interfere with objective knowledge itself. And it's going to be just a short time. I've already suggested to you people, I don't guess we have to worry about me getting a Nobel for this. But they're going to find, I don't know, you want me to think about it? At any rate, they're going to stumble across very shortly. Should be in our lifetime if you want a real projection. All right, here we go. Stand back, all of you astrologers. They're going to start, if they haven't already, in the what would seem to be the other end of the spectrum, astrophysics. They're going to begin to hit, in their view, however they're going to explain it, the same sort of thing, that they are beginning to reach such a level in a certain way that they had not suspected before, that their observations are now interfering, and one of them may finally say, oh, wait a minute, that has a strange kind of parallel to particle physics. Whew, that's weird, and then they'll have to just press on. But that their observations now are becoming part of that which is being observed, and they can no longer take it as being actual, clinical, objective, sang-froid observations. That it's now colored by the observation themselves. Back to the main road. They continue to speak of the limits of human knowledge, even as a corollary, even as a side bit, pointing out that there are inherently problems with technology of getting down to such a small level, and as I said, it will finally be to such a large level. But all of you got enough passing knowledge to know what I'm speaking of. And it seems to keep expanding. As the microscope itself developed from the 1600s on, they kept getting bigger and bigger. Light telescopes, electron microscopes, and now the, whatever they call them, the atomic laser. They keep pushing it, but every time there seems to be some advance, those that apparently, those who are recognized as being some reasonably intelligent, if not expertly intelligent, spokesman for that field will say, we are again at a temporary cul-de-sac along this line because we are simply reaching the limits of human knowledge. We're not going to stop, we'll press on, but currently what we've done is just reach the limit. With them, with the ordinary world as always, I'm certainly not presenting to you some objective contrary theory, because what they say is true. That is correct at that level. But what you are trying to scratch with pursuing this sort of thing, you've got to transcend that won't do. Does anybody see why I went through the first 10 or 15 minutes of talking about, or asking you that question over and over about, since extreme information does not seem to produce extreme behavior, is it that the information that's available is not extreme enough, or could it be that the intellect as it is now cannot perceive of what should be extreme information? Nobody sees a connection. All right. Yeah. I've said it before, so I don't mind saying it again. It is not. Now I put it as questions before. I'll do it again. Can you conceive of for a second that it's not a problem of the limits of human knowledge? If you're good, notice how life works. Let me push it further. Some man's making a statement, and he is as correct as can be at that level for the ordinary world. he says not only is it the limits of human knowledge to which I'm referring in this paper or my comments tonight, but it's also this. It's not just the limits of human knowledge. It is we have reached areas now technologically, microscopes, the great atom crushers and telescopes. We have technically reached areas that almost seem to be, they portend of a possible dead end. That is, they're saying, for instance, that we do not know how to make microscopes. We do not know how to deal certainly with visible light. We don't know how to deal anymore to see any further into the basic structure of matter. Not because we don't want to, not because some of us do not have some theories about what we might find, but just literally. We just got to tell you people, the public, we just got to tell you the technology is just not available. All right, that sounds like that it's almost an excuse. I don't mean they mean it that way, but it sounds like it's almost a why as to why there are presently these particular limits to human knowledge, because it's the technology. What I asked some of you within the last year or so, can you perceive of this? That what they're saying is true enough. I'm not saying that somebody has invented a microscope of some kind and is holding it out. Right? But they cannot see this, the most intelligent, ordinary people, the way things are wired. They cannot see that it's still a matter of the limits of human intellect, not technology, because if this was expanded, then some humans say, wait a minute, I know how to make a microscope that do that, which is what happens over the long run. Well, I guess that was worth 3 or 4 of you. But notice how subtle, but it is telling. It is specifically connected to the way things are wired up in the human intellect. It's not that they're trying to shift blame, because they are being as specific, they are being as intelligent as is needed in the ordinary world right now. And they will say we have theories, and the theories may prove to be correct later on when the technology changes, which is not the point. Then it's too late. That is, it's no longer extreme. But they are saying, not as an excuse, but it seems to be a kind of rational, inescapable description of why in this certain area we have reached the present limits of human knowledge, is because technologically we are now so sophisticated. It's far away from the days of Fig Newton laying under the tree and coming up with these great ideas because an apricot fell down. We can no longer play the natural philosopher, that is, the natural scientist, by simply going out and observing. We're now into the areas, we're so far beyond that, we're into the areas now that the technology itself is a limiting factor. And nobody disputes that. It is indisputable at the 3-dimensional level. But do you see, they're speaking of technology, back to this one that some of you like sometimes, they're speaking of technology as though technology was a something. As though technology is indeed, it can, of course, they'd admit, be, it could be a verb, but it's certainly a noun, that technology is a something, that it's over there. It's like a Greyhound bus. I mean, it's perhaps a little more complicated. Perhaps some of the lay public would have a harder time recognizing this specific technology than they would a Greyhound bus, but they're treating technology as though the intellect, not just verbally, it's the same thing, but the intellect is saying we have certain limits, obvious limits right now, of human knowledge in this area, but it's not because we're not trying, it's not because, for instance, specifically, it's not because of some flaw in my sensories or my cohorts. We all have good sight, hearing, etc. It's not that anymore, because we're no longer natural philosophers. We're not out observing. We're not out becoming botanists and zoologists on the basis of getting out there and observing. You know, that's all been done. We're now down to the level that the only way we're observing more, the only way we're gaining new information is based on technology. And everybody goes, yeah. You're supposed to go, yeah, it's true at that level. as though technology was a something. Technology is this. No matter anything they call a something, a religion, any institution, anything that seems to be outside the intellect of man. Once you can start going around that spherical corner from the three-dimensional world, there is no such thing. There is no creature, there is no verb, there is no noun that is separate from man's intellect. No other than death, always, if you want something to rely on. I don't know that all of you find that all that comforting, but if you want one thing to rely on, you got it. But they speak of technology, and everybody responds to it. You're supposed to. That and other things, but in this case, technology. And they're saying the limits of human knowledge right now in these specific areas is based on technology. And it's not just the hard sciences, by the way, if you want a quick sidestep, the softer. Notice I didn't say flaccid, and especially I never did say impotent sciences. So, all of you psychologists and sociologists and economicists out there, don't write me. If any of you economists want to write and complain, write to an astrologer. And if there's any astrologers watching this, you write to a weather forecaster. All right? And leave me out of it. Even in what would seem to be the softer sciences, rather than laying the limits having to do with microscopes and that kind of technology, they have their own kind of technology, and it's basically statistical technology. They might call it experimental, they might call it, well, I'd about cover it with the soft sciences. Well, I'm not trying to hold them up to any shoddier light, edit out shoddy, any shoddier light than I was physics. But notice they would say, when it comes to explaining, a psychiatrist, a sociologist, a psychologist, if they were speaking now, a recognized expert in the field, which I'm not questioning, and they would say, we have made great strides, obviously since the days of Freud, the beginning of this century, in being able to not only treat some aberrant behavior, but in fact we can predict statistically to some degree. Now, we admit, not totally, but to some degree we can suggest that certain kinds of people seem inclined to behave in certain ways. Now, it is not, I cannot present it to you as an absolute law yet, because we have reached, and what they're saying, without using the terms, they're saying that we have reached the limits currently of our technology, because what they're saying is we do not yet have enough statistical evidence. Now in their case, enough statistical evidence would be every piece of statistical evidence possible. That is, every piece of local reality. Now that's not any form of sarcasm, but that is what they mean without knowing it. Because what they're actually saying is we have reached the limits in this area of technology. That is what is limiting human knowledge in the field, in this individual specialized field of the study of man as opposed to the study of matter, for instance, in physics. But what they're saying is the limits of knowledge are now due to the limits of technology. That's fine in the city. That's the way things go. It is a kind of stabilizer. It is a kind of keel. It is a kind of E-based influence that keeps things at a certain tempo. But what I want you to try and see, that all reasons, I mean, talking about legitimate ones from the ordinary view, all reasons as to why there are certain specific limits to human knowledge right now in any area, nowadays are always referred to the limits of technology of some form. But the limits of technology are the limits of the human intellect, because there is no technology out there. They're not waiting. If there's going to be some breakthrough, some progression of examining equipment at the particle and subparticle level, you do know this, I make it sound silly, there's not going to be some scientist, we got to turn the tape over. Don't lose your place. Right. It can sound silly, but notice if I didn't point out the silliness, there'd be all sorts of things that yours and everyone else, including scientists and experts, would take as unexamined, tacit statements of local reality. Well, they call it reality, of course. But if there's going to be a progression, which there's going to be of some kind, of the technology of studying matter, let's say at the macroscopic and subparticle level, you do know that outside some of those big bone crushers in Switzerland, there's not going to be late one night, some scientist, after a hard day running the equipment, is going to walk outside to have a smoke, and suddenly, while he's out there in the dark, trip over something and look down, and it's a brand new kind of microscope, the likes of which nobody, it's the very thing he's going to go, oh, it's just what we've been looking for. Now, you know that's not true, any more than they kept trying to be able to sail without turning around and running into the pier that they only left several months ago. Somebody one time didn't finally look down and go, oh my God, it's a sextant. Or when they couldn't find latitudes, it wasn't it finally some guy, or longitudes, that one guy finally hanging around on a ship and wondering where are we, looked down and went, it's a Timex, and find a watch. All right, I guess I made it all silly enough. What will happen? And no one ever notices it, not in this sense, and it has a specific purpose the way it is wired into the human system. It is not that technology then has progressed almost as though it were some sort of separate living entity itself, that is, that suddenly somebody just kicking over rocks and there's the very telescope, the very microscope, the very piece of new technological equipment that's been lacking. What gets expanded? I repeat again, once it happens mechanically at that level, it's of no great boon to anybody attempting to do this, but it is to know about it. What happens is somebody somewhere goes, wait a minute, that sort of thing. There seems to be less and less days of eureka. I think it was shortly after Euclid somebody copyrighted that and cut down on it. But at any rate, it's probably some guy sitting around and going, wait a minute. It might take him 2 or 3 months or years. Well, wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute. And he tries and he tries. You know how it goes, the scientific, technological methods and processes. But no one notices it was not a progression of technology. The limits that they were referring to previously, the limits of technology that were indeed limiting human knowledge at that stage and at that area, the technology one day was not sitting around and going, Eureka! You know, whatever the needed technology was. The current state of the art of a microscope, an atomic microscope, an atomic scanning microscope, wasn't sitting around thinking, boy, God, I hate being as dumb. Well, I hate having the limits I have. I'm not dumb, of course, but I hate these limits. The microscope finally goes, wait a minute, wait a minute, all I got to do is do this. They do not notice it is not an expansion of technology. Do you follow? That is, it is not an expansion of water. It's not an expansion of information. It was an expansion of the capacity of the bucket. It was not expansion. It was not a growth in technology, although that seemed to be what occurred. Visibly, materially. It was an expansion of the intellect. Your freedom, which is the only real freedom, your freedom will not be found in you simply being found not guilty. Every attempt to change, to expand information, for people to get new information, and they believe that that is what would change them. That extreme, let's say first, since we already discounted extreme information, or I did to my satisfaction, that new information can produce new behavior. That sounds a little more reasonable than extreme information should produce extreme behavior, right? Wrong, but we'll go ahead. At all ordinary levels, the attempt, the belief, the thought that having new information could make it possible for me to behave anew, that I could change the way I behave if I had new information, that I could, in fact, finally lose weight if I buy just one more goddamn diet book. If I can just find one more place to lay one down here in my apartment, just one more, then that'll do it. Just one more piece of information, because this one's entitled The Last Goddamn Diet Book You'll Ever Need. So that's good enough for me. And it's by a doctor. It's by a guy with 2 degrees. Would he lie? Like those last. The belief, wired in, that new information will produce, should be able to produce, new behavior. The way I was about to present it to you, and I will press on for a bit, is all such attempts are based upon trying to gather up new kinds of verbal, that is intellectual evidence, which will bring forth a verdict of not guilty. Now, at some, let's take just the ordinary visible judicial level, then you would think once you have been in some way arrested, incarcerated, freedom is just a natural outcome. It is going to follow a verdict of not guilty. That is freedom if you are incarcerated, and it is not ill-appropriate for me to describe that most people's nervous system, on good, bad, and in between days, sometimes now and then, feels as though if they are asked if they feel captive, generally, of life, most people say, oh, yeah, all the way from yes to sort of. And so paralleling that with that kind of ordinary criminal judicial position, then it would seem that freedom would naturally follow, that your freedom would be found in you being found not guilty, and finally I'm turned loose. Now, I've got several ways that I would point and suggest that some of you look. Internally, on the personal level, it is as though you would be found not guilty of being you, that you could be finally turned loose, that everything that I have been wired up, that ordinary people, of course, blame on their subconscious and their childhood. They blame on the environment when apparently appropriate, and they blame on genes at such times that they cannot think of anything else. But if in some way they could internally be found not guilty, that would surely be a kind of freedom. But before I push it further internally, how about all of these stories, all of these myths and these tales, and the ones that your older parts of your nervous system even have taken of history, all these stories all the way from Socrates to Jesus and others not so well known, of these people being in the position that they have been charged with something and they are facing extreme execution, if you'll pardon the expression, of their case. That is, the charge can render them dead meat. Let me take the 2 stories that are best known, Socrates and Jesus. They both, in a certain view, are plowing the same kinds of ground. Both of these cases, you can take it as being one of them, it shouldn't bother you by now, but you people out on tape, you can take one of them, if you have to, as being secular or clerical, another one not so. But in most cases you had people charged by their time and place with activities, with behavior that could cost them their life. Extreme information. They bring them before the Senate. They brought him in front of Poncho Pilate. And he didn't say, oh, Cisco, no. They bring him before these tribunals, and the information they give them is, they say, do you realize you're charged with corrupting the youth of Greece, which has always struck me as one, perhaps the original oxymoron, but never mind. Don't write me, it's a joke. Corrupting the morals of Athens, of the youth of Athens, or what was Jesus? Claiming to be the king of the Jews or whatever it was. But at any rate, so they announced, you've been charged with this. And they went, okay. Now here should have been the extreme information. If we find you guilty, it's goodbye. So you would think there are people, and of course the rest of the stories are that they were both innocent, unjustly accused, and etc. But at any rate, that should make it a little more interesting. Just absolutely unjustly accused of this. Just, the Philistines back in action, taking over the world again. So the extreme information should be, you're charged with such and such. Now, it should have been extreme information to both of them, based upon the stories. If you look at it a certain way, they should have gone, what? Now, that should have been extreme just by itself. To just say, well, bring in Socrates, and a large number of people here in the city have, sufficient number, have said that you are a absolute corrupting, ungodly influence on the youth of this city. Here he is at whatever age he was, 65, of playing this game with them all these years. That should have been extreme information. But at least to get to the point that they say, all right, you understand now, we're going to have to go through this trial, and you're going to be charged with that, etc. And if you're found guilty, it's graduation day for you. Now, extreme information should have been, a great example, should have been a perfect setup for some sort of extreme behavior on their part. I suggest to you, as you might be surprised, that in these two stories, extreme behavior was forthcoming. Yeah, some of you are saying yeah and ha, but wait a minute. Let me see if I can't make you see that's even more subtle than you might be ha-haing about. Now try, as always, divorce yourself from, if any of you are Jews or Christians or Greeks, or if any of you are humans, try and divorce yourself from these stories. Because what we're talking about are the verbal dressings on transmissions of certain kinds of energy continually running through life, manifested in such stories. And here these two guys are. Let's take Socrates. But there's great similarities, as you should know, in the Jesus story. They, beforehand, during the hand, after the hand was played out, gave him a way to be found not guilty. They told him beforehand, just do so-and-so. It's just a charade. We don't care. Just say it. Just do this, and we'll all go, and then we'll say not guilty. And that's it. And he didn't. Then what was going on? They sent him messages, look, you're not going about the right way. Just do so-and-so, and we'll say not guilty. Or we may say, well, do a couple of laps around the Colosseum. And then I guess, as sharp as Socrates is, he would have had to say, you're talking about Rome, this is Athens, we don't have a Colosseum. In the middle of it, he wouldn't do it. In fact, the heart of the story, according to Plato, is he got up and not only gave him a nice sermon and speech and commentary, he even brought in what I'm telling you is their offers. And he even pointed out that he was going to have to turn them down. Appreciate it, but I know you mean well. Jesus did somewhat the same thing according to that story. That the judge, Pilate, just said, look, I got to go, we got a party later, and this kind of stuff, I'm just here. We're a conquering army, and I don't really care that much about what you people do, but they've got you here, and I got to do something. I got to take care of this. Just say yes or no. Say no. Or say yes. Have the story when he said, I don't care, just do that and let's be on with it. And according to this story, he just wouldn't say anything. No, come on, just say yes or no. I don't care. Either one, and I'll go with it. We'll be out of here. He wouldn't say anything. Now, but listen to this. They were both offered ways to be found not guilty, to be set free, and they would not take it. let me plead with you one more time to wrestle your own nervous system if you're still having any kind, or I know many of you are having them, you can't help it, but if you are actually listening to any of the internal noise that, well, this was a godly kind of production, or this was... Now listen to your own nervous system, the part that can respond to this in a non-local manner. They would not accept at that level. They have been charged with something. At that same level, they would not take the kinds of sources, the kind of forces that brought about the charges that would then say, all right, look, we'll find you not guilty. Why? What's up? I already told you what you're knowing it. What's up is, at that level, being found guilty, I have to put it to you technically, some of you thought I was going to say something like being found not guilty at that level ain't shit, but I ain't going to say that kind of crude stuff. Being found not guilty at that level, that is the same level at which you apparently have been indicted, charged, arrested, tried, to be found guilty at that level will not produce freedom. All right, if you think this got too complex for you, have you ever, at any ordinary level, I don't care what it is, gone through any sort of attempt, study, series of exercises, courses, it's self-improvement that produced that which you originally dreamed of? Now be so bold as to answer for each and every person on this planet. The answer is 9. Never. Nothing wrong. Just the way things are. A person attempts, maybe even succeeds temporarily. If somebody is overweight from overeating, and they spend whatever time, energy, money, and they lose weight. Think of the dreams you had, those of you that have been through it. Or some of you may have had dreams, especially if you're a man, that if I was a 298-pound weakling instead of a 98-pound weakling, boy, how much different my life would be. Or boy, if I could lose 100 pounds, how much different my life would be. And if you do it, what you're doing, if I could be found not guilty of being fat, if I could be found not guilty of being a scrawny, frightened weakling, if I could be found not guilty, if I could in some way improve my personality, expand my vocabulary, if I could do that, what you're saying is I would be found not guilty. I have some ill, and I am purporting to cure this ill. It is not an attack on life, and it's not an attack on people, but all of you should know. If you don't know, then this is probably just a passing fancy. It's simply the way things are arranged. Trying to find yourself not guilty will not set you free, even when you apparently have succeeded. That is, the day comes that you did, after all sorts of apparent effort, you have lost 30 pounds, 50 pounds, and you now look like what you thought you wanted to look like, and you just brand new clothes, and you go down to the neighborhood singles bar. And I'm not saying it's not fun. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with anybody doing that. But insofar as what you thought would be the extreme outcome, that my life will never be the same, that was true for what? A night? 2 nights? How long did it take? 4 or 5 days? And you put back on 2 pounds. Not trying to give you the blues, you just got to face up to the way life is arranged ordinarily. All attempts at the ordinary level to change oneself is an attempt for you to shift around the evidence and in some way to be able to render a not guilty verdict to yourself. But I'm suggesting to you the external manifestations of such stories as Socrates, forget whether it happened. It's so beautiful that it shouldn't have happened. In fact, I ought to tell some of you, I know who made the story up to start with, that and Jesus, but we ain't got time to go into that. Why is it that these two guys know stories were so superior in some way that history remembers them for thousands of years, that they were so superior, and now they are faced with death, and they weren't guilty to start with. They weren't guilty of anything, and life, as by the Roman Senate and by the Roman court of Pilate, said, look, just do so and so. Just say yes or no. Just nod your head, and that's the end of it. You will be found not guilty. Even if they were found guilty, the point was, we'll find you not guilty, you'll walk out with your life. And they wouldn't do it. My suggestion to you, if I had to make it plainer, is that they knew it was a waste of time. That will not do anything. They knew that you can't find me not guilty. Because if, indeed, those people had some expanded, more complex intelligence, they couldn't be found guilty for what obvious reason? They no longer thought they were guilty. And it had nothing to do, just no connection whatsoever, for the Roman Senate, for the Greek Senate, for the Albanian House of Lords. Talk about a new oxymoron. For somebody in life to say, you are not guilty. No fooling around, no nothing. We've decided. We made a horrendous mistake. We throw ourselves, at least theoretically, at your feet. We beg your forgiveness because there is no doubt, good sir, you are not guilty. It's meaningless. Of course, it could have even been beyond meaningless. If you get on beyond meaningless, it can begin to be meaningless in a negative way. But that's another story too. But can any of you consider the possibility of what that story at the chemical level represents? All such stories. It's not some kind of, well, I'm mad, not going to play. You people shouldn't have arrested me anyway, and so I'm not going to, you know, all you want to do, you won't find me not guilty, so it'll save your conscience in some way, and I won't do it. It's not that, or it's not that, well, I'm actually, you don't realize it, I'm not simply a bricklayer. I'm not an aluminum siding salesman. I'm actually the Son of God. And I don't care whether you find me guilty or not, or kill me, because it won't matter. I won't actually die because I'm part of the gods. Forget all of that. Consider how it is, what it might represent at a quite real, not dreamy, not imaginary, not some level that's based upon local reality, but on the reality of a more universal reality, that there's an intelligence here and there in people that recognizes all this idea of finding me not guilty of anything, it doesn't matter what, is beyond moot. It makes moot seem like a very pertinent word. It's not situation. It's just, it's meaningless, at least cubed. All of you in your own way, if you didn't like my examples of losing weight or putting on weight, all of you, all humans, in more than one time in your life and through more than one example, have given a good attempt and may have seemed at the time that was darn near close to success, that in some area you have attempted to find yourself not guilty. That's what going to confession is in the Catholic Church. That's what being born again in Protestant religions and Buddhism. It's what all of these apparent conversions of some kind, all of that is, I am now not guilty. Because I was once a heathen, and now I'm a Muslim. I'm not guilty. And people may sing and dance and jump around and slap each other on the back, which again is fine. Especially, you know, since disco's out of favor now. And they may go, I feel so great. But you people have got to realize, the rest of them know it. It's just nobody wants to talk about it. There's nowhere to go with it. But you've got to realize that finding yourself not guilty, no matter what the circumstance, no matter how long it seems to last, no matter how short-lived it is very quickly insufficient. It simply did not work, whether it seemed to be tied to a quite valid or quite real materiality, such as losing weight, or whether it is that you simply decide, I'm going to be a nicer person. I'm going to now try and always put myself second and think about others first. And that you try it, and it feels so good, which of course anything new feels good. Being able to wear a size smaller dress or shirt feels good. But you try it and it feels good. And you would say, I in some way am less guilty than I was. You have in a sense found yourself not guilty that I was up until today. Well, I started last night after I was reading that article, and I really decided to do it. But up until last night, I have been an arrogant, pushy son of a bitch. But by God, if a person can be that way, then they cannot be that way. And so, starting now, I'm not going to. I have found myself not guilty. But the evidence, the proof of it, is always insufficient. Whatever seems to be the new energy is not truly new chemical transmissions in your brain. It is a kind of reshifting of the evidence. That is, it is a kind of moving around of the kind of chemical patterns already taking place in your brain. But it is not new ones. But it feels good to just be able to shift around. It feels good to ordinary people, much less somebody trying to do this. If indeed you by and large up until now just bitch constantly, and if for some reason through the great influence of the DeWitts and the Reader's Digest, and there was some article on how you too can quit bitching, and now you sit and read it and it gave you 4 or 5 little pointers, and you could tear out the page and you carried it around, it told you things to do, and you tried it the next day, you can enjoy it. You could really believe, my God, I've wasted my whole life. If I had just done these 4 simple things, my life would have been so much better. I have found myself not guilty. But you simply have got to realize that is going to wear itself out very likely before your second coffee break of the day. It is not a chemical change in the brain. Therefore, the Socrateses, the Jesuses, realize that there is no way that a not guilty plea has any bearing on me. It will not produce the freedom. It will not turn me loose because it did not captivate me to start with. The source to an ordinary intelligence, the source apparently of captivity, cannot release you. You've got to simply see that there is no release from that kind of captivity, because to call it captivity is to call it life. It is not that I need some kind of extreme new information that, wait a minute, they may find me guilty. What I need is suddenly a Perry Mason type show for a guy to run in the courtroom hollering, wait, I've got a new piece of evidence that will prove conclusively that they're not guilty. Even that can happen. What good does it do? That which is apparently available and can be said that should be, that you would think would be extreme information, will not produce extreme behavior. If at the last moment, what could they rush in to say about Socrates? After everything he said, after everything they accused him of, after every witness, after everything that went on, and it doesn't matter what went on, but I'm just using an example. Now, if you were writing a screenplay or a TV script for that kind of Perry Mason or Matlock show, wouldn't you think, all right, right there at the tail end, right in the last 7 minutes, suddenly a piece of brand new evidence. I mean, everything looks bad. The mood music, the way even his own attorneys are looking like this is not going well at all. But you can make up, can you not, suddenly an extreme turn in the script where a guy rushes in, he hollers, I've got to confess, I can't stand it anymore. And he has this a piece of extreme information, which what do you want for extreme information? He's going to suddenly admit to killing the deceased himself. Some piece of extreme information. Now try to think, what could have happened? Try and hold this in your own nervous system now, not just in the Senate of Athens. What kind of information could have suddenly intruded upon the trial of Socrates that would have found him not guilty? That is, that would have made any difference in the brain chemistry of a Socrates. All right, I'll answer for you. You already guessed. Nothing. All right, those of you who are good, there would have been something, but it's in the other. It would not have been a new piece of information. It would not have been more water. It would have been, if the buckets, represented in this case by the Senate of Athens, if suddenly their intellects had expanded, didn't have been nothing else to say. They wouldn't even said something. Of course, I'm going to put words on it for you. It'd be like, if their technology, suddenly their intellects, their microscopes, the very things that they seem to be using to examine this case of Socrates, if it suddenly expanded, then they wouldn't say it. It's not. But here's what it would amount to: is they would look around, at least themselves, and go, "My God, what the hell are we doing? Are we idiots?" And they wouldn't even bother to say not guilty. They would just, like motion Socrates to get out of here, or, meet me down the street and let's all have a drink. And they'd have gone over and hugged him, and maybe at themselves gone, dumb old me. But it's not new information. It's not the new information that would be extreme. The extreme would be if their intellect suddenly expanded, their capacity. Then, of course, they wouldn't be called that, but then a not guilty plea would mean something. Do you follow in connection of you trying in some way, you or any ordinary person, to in some way find yourself not guilty, spiritually, intellectually, emotionally, whatever you want to call it? That I'm trying to forgive myself for hating my mother all these years because it's not really my fault. It was just unconscious feelings I picked up from watching too much TV when I was a child. It is not a matter that you in some way are going to come up with new information that will allow you to find yourself not guilty. It would be that your capacity to take in information expanded to such a point, I hate to say this, but I'm going ahead. Forget it as soon as I put it in words. You either hear it or you don't. The reality. It's not that some kind of information is going to come along from psychiatry, or sociology, or religion, or from anywhere, that there's going to be information come that will make you feel suddenly not guilty over being you, not guilty over living the life you've led, not guilty over everything you've thought and felt and etc. It's not possible. That's not it. What if the technology of your bucket, of your intellect, expanded to such a point, and I'm going to say it in words, that you understand this whole apparent picture of people feeling guilty. That is, that you understood, I'm not guilty of anything. There's no such thing as guilt. Or that you understand what the reality, the chemical reality behind the word guilt is. Then, although you wouldn't call it that, then and only then could you find yourself not guilty. But you notice nobody can do it for somebody else. There is no technology about to be developed by somebody external to you, whether they apparently were a physicist or a priest or a rabbi or a sociologist or your best friend, that's going to say, wait a minute, I've got a new piece of information that's going to set you free. When I tell you what I have just read in this brand new, hot off the press book by a guy that's a combination psychiatrist, rabbi, and third baseman, and as soon as I tell you just what he says in the preface, it's just changed my whole life just 10 minutes ago when I rushed over here. As soon as you hear it, because I know as long as we talked, all the stories and the way you feel tied up to all the bad thoughts you've had and all the sexual perversions you've dreamed of, and as soon as you hear this, you're going to go, oh my God, I'm free. It would be that the information does not come in some extreme form, because if you followed all tonight's labyrinth, you should see that it's not a matter of extreme information, that the information cannot be extreme enough to cause extreme behavior. It would be not that this new information came from somewhere out there. It would be that your own technology, your own examining device, that is your own intellect, suddenly expanded to a point that this whole idea, the whole scenario of guilt and everything else was, But notice, it's here in you individually. Now, something can help stimulate it. That's what this, of course, is about. But it is not going to be some piece of information There's not going to be some breakthrough in technology, if it was referred to, which it wouldn't be, as some kind of religious or intellectual or psychological technology that was developed out here. It's a change in your brain chemistry to where your bucket gets bigger. And then the amount of water that only the bucket knows exists in the universe, you'd suddenly be aware, oh, wait a minute, there's more water. But was there? Your bucket got bigger. The capacity was increased, not the intensity, not the startling nature of the information. That didn't increase. Your capacity increased. What is it you think? I keep referring to such things as 3D and 4D reality and information. It's not just to be cute. It's just you can only see so much. You can only hear so much. You can only feel and taste and etc. At the ordinary level, I thought we'd well establish that to everyone's satisfaction. No matter what you think you know, even if you thought that you were picking up strange voices from flying saucers or from God, even if you were, you're getting it through your senses. And has it ever been startling? Anybody even dreamed that they were getting information from flying saucers? And you thought, wait, that's pretty extreme. And you said, I guess the information's kind of unusual. And the person will go, yeah, tell me about it. And you say, well, you think I could take it? I mean, could you make me privy to what they're telling you? And maybe the guy said, well, now you're going to have to pay me some money, or you're going to have to go through a little test, and I got to be sure you're serious. Wait, I got to ask them first. Check with me tomorrow night. You go through all that, and he finally says, all right, I'll tell you. But you're going to be shocked. You better sit down. Imagine right quick if I got to do this again. What's the most extreme thing that some other run-of-the-mill, shit-kicking farmer or scientist, writer, that is another human, is going to say, all right, they told me that I'm the only person on this planet they gave this information to. Here it is. Let your imagination, as they call it here, go wild. What's the worst thing I could tell you? Not just worst, the most extreme. Think about it. Of course, the most extreme is always this again. They sent word that we're all going to die. The limits of human knowledge is human knowledge. It's not technology. It is not anything external to any individual nervous system, since of course there is nothing external to your nervous system. But since the limits are not there, the expansion of it is not out there. What else do you want? Now to conclude tonight, I have saved me a surprise. Get Socrates, bring. I want you to meet somebody. Not guilty.